The distance between them was nothing. Linda Owusu had stopped breathing. Professor Taeyang Beon stood close enough that she could see the exact moment his careful, controlled expression stopped being either of those things. His head tilted down, slow and deliberate, and she tilted up, and the world outside his fourth-floor office ceased to exist entirely. Then the door opened. They stepped apart. The air between them went cold. Linda picked up her bag from the chair. She did not look at him. She could not. What no one in that doorway understood, not the man who had just walked in, not the one standing at the window recollecting himself, was that it had taken 6 study sessions, 1 rainstorm, and 14 months of silent grief to arrive at this single unguarded moment. And someone had just filed a formal complaint to make sure it never happened again. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Always Smiled. 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in late October, Linda Owusu sat in her academic advisor's office and arranged her face into something pleasant, while the numbers were read back to her. 2 missed deadlines, 1 incomplete lab submission, a GPA that had slipped below the threshold required to maintain her scholarship. The scholarship that was, in the plainest possible terms, the only reason she was in New York at all. Her advisor, a tired man named Dr. Peterson, who smelled of bad coffee and genuine concern, said the words, "mandatory tutoring assignment," with the careful delivery of someone placing a fragile object on a table. And Linda nodded and said she completely understood, and thanked him for his time, and walked out of the office and down 2 flights of stairs and through the main doors of Aldrich Hall into the October air. She stood on the steps for 43 seconds. She counted. Then she put her headphones in and walked to the dining hall to find Tumelo. Tumelo Cloete was eating jollof rice with the focused attention of a woman who took lunch seriously, her South African flag tapestry bag draped over the back of her chair, her international law textbook open beside her plate, and entirely unread. She looked up when Linda sat down across from her, registered the expression on her friend's face, the particular brightness that meant the opposite of bright, and put down her fork. "What happened?" Linda told her. Tumelo listened without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Linda noticed it. When she finished, Tumelo leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Taeyang Beon," she said finally. "They assigned you to Taeyang Beon. You say that like it means something." "Linda." Tumelo turned her head. "Do you know what Unipark told me last week?" She said she tried to make eye contact with him during lecture and he looked through her like she was a pane of glass. A pane of glass. Unipark also said the library ghost turns the lights off on the 5th floor. The lights do go off on the 5th floor. That's a known issue with the motion sensors. Tumelo stopped herself. That is not the point. The point is Professor Beon does not smile, has never been seen to smile, and once, allegedly, returned an essay with so many corrections that the student framed it as modern art and submitted it to the campus gallery. That is definitely a rumor. I am trying to help you understand the gravity of your situation. I'll be fine, Linda said. Tumelo studied her for a moment with the particular attention she reserved for things that mattered. Linda met her gaze without flinching. She had been meeting people's gaze without flinching for 14 months. It was one of the first things she had perfected. "Okay," Tumelo said, and picked up her fork, because she had learned, over 3 years of rooming with Linda Owusu, that when Linda said she would be fine, the door was closed. What she had not yet learned, what she was only beginning to suspect in the way you suspect a sound you can't quite place, was that the door was always closed, and Linda was always behind it, and had been for far longer than anyone knew. Taeyang Beon's office occupied the corner of the 4th floor of Mercer Hall, where the building's old bones showed most clearly. Exposed stone on one wall, Tall windows that rattled slightly in the wind, oak shelves packed with behavioral neuroscience texts, arranged in a system that appeared chaotic, but was, upon closer inspection, precise. Linda arrived 7 minutes early and stood in the corridor studying the nameplate on the door as though it might tell her something useful. It didn't. She knocked. He said to come in. He was at the window with his back to her, one hand on the sill, long black hair loose past his shoulders, looking at something in the courtyard below with an absolute stillness that made her feel she had interrupted something she had no name for. She noted the set of his shoulders, the unhurried quality of his stillness, and understood immediately that this was not a man who did anything without intention, including stand at windows. "Ms. Owusu," he said without turning, "you're early." "I'm always early." He turned. His face was composed and precise, a face that gave information deliberately and withheld it the same way. Dark eyes moved across her with focused efficiency, and she understood that she was being assessed the way he probably assessed everything, completely and without announcement. "Sit," he said. Not unkindly, just without ceremony. She sat. He took the chair across from her, not behind his desk, which surprised her, and opened her file. He looked at it for a moment, then set it aside. "Tell me where you think you're struggling," he said. "Not what the file says, where you actually feel it." The question landed differently than she expected. She had prepared for clinical diagnosis. Here are the modules. Here are the gaps. Here is the remediation plan. He had instead asked her to locate something, which required honesty about the existence of an interior life she had been successfully hiding from herself for months. She answered carefully. Too much material. The pacing of the module. The lab running parallel to everything else. He listened without writing, which was somehow more thorough than note-taking. His attention completely undivided, his face still. When she finished, he asked 4 follow-up questions that were precise enough to tell her he had heard every word and discarded nothing. Then he drew a study plan across a blank sheet of paper and began to teach her. The thing about Professor Taeyang Beon that the rumors had missed entirely was this. In a room stripped of performance, where the only objective was clarity, he was extraordinary. He did not perform brilliance. He simply had it. The way a well-made instrument has resonance, naturally without effort, as a function of its structure. He took complicated things and laid them flat until you could see their shape. He moved through ideas the way someone moves through familiar terrain, certain, unhurried, knowing exactly where the ground was. Linda found herself thinking without performing. Just reasoning. Just following a thread of thought somewhere interesting because the thought was interesting. Not because anyone was watching her follow it. She had not experienced that in a very long time, and she did not recognize it until it was already happening. When she caught herself, the smile came back up automatically. Reflex. Defense. He was mid-sentence when it happened. He paused, barely, a half beat, and then continued. But the pause had been there. She filed it. At the end of the session, he handed back her notes. "Thursday," he said. "Same time." She gathered her things and walked out into the corridor, and 20 feet. From his door she stopped and put her back against the wall and simply breathed for a moment. The hallway around her was full of ordinary life. Someone laughing, a phone buzzing, 2 students arguing in a language she half recognized. And she stood in the middle of it, feeling quietly, inexplicably unsettled. She had no word for what that room had felt like. She was not sure she wanted one yet. That night, back in Kessler Hall, she sat at her desk with her laptop open and her notes in order, and the university's automated mental health survey blinking in her inbox, the kind they sent every semester, a 15-question check-in that the Student Wellness Center used to flag students in distress. She had been receiving it for 3 years. She had never opened it. She clicked it away now and opened her module notes instead. Across the room, Tumilo was pretending to read her textbook and actually watching Linda in the peripheral way of someone trying not to be caught doing it. Linda looked fine. She always looked fine. That was the thing Tumelo could not yet articulate. That her best friend looked fine the way a window looks solid until the moment something goes through it. In Mercer Hall, the 4th floor lights were still on. Taeyang sat at his desk with Linda's file open in front of him and a blank sheet of paper beside it. He looked at the emergency contact field for a long time, the practiced blankness of it, the lowercase n/a typed in a font too small for the space, and wrote 3 words on the blank sheet. He looked at them. Then he set his pen down and looked out at the courtyard below, where the last of October's leaves were releasing from the oak trees in slow, reluctant spirals. Something was wrong with Linda Owusu, and it had nothing to do with the curriculum. He was not yet certain what it was. But Taeyang Beon had spent 15 years studying the way the human mind hid things from itself and others, and he recognized, with the particular clarity of professional instinct, the specific quality of a person who had become very skilled at a performance they could no longer sustain. He would need to pay attention. He was already paying attention. That, he noted with clinical honesty, was the beginning of a problem he did not yet know how to classify. Chapter 2. 6 Sessions of Beautiful Lying. The second session was on a Thursday, and she arrived with sunglasses on. It was overcast and cold, and there was no reasonable case for sunglasses. Taeyang noted them when she walked in, said nothing, and returned to the paper he had been marking. She set her bag down, took her seat, unpacked her notes with the brisk efficiency of someone who had decided that if they moved fast enough, nothing would catch them. He did not say anything about the sunglasses. This was deliberate. He had learned over years of working with students under pressure that the surest way to make a person shut down was to name their defense mechanism before they were ready to release it. So he taught. He asked questions. He waited. 40 minutes in, she reached up to push a strand of hair from her face and pulled the sunglasses off without thinking. She set them on the desk and looked back at her notes. He moved his gaze to her face. The dark circles were deep in, the way that only forms after consecutive weeks of inadequate sleep. The kind of exhaustion that had settled into the architecture of her face rather than sitting on the surface of it. She had covered them with effort, and the effort had partially worked, and partially hadn't. He reached across the desk and slid a glass of water toward her. He didn't look up from the annotation he was writing when he did it. He didn't comment. It was simply there. She stared at it. Something moved across her face that she quelled quickly, and she picked up the glass and drank. And when she set it back down, her hand was very slightly unsteady. He continued writing. The third session, he asked her why she wanted to be a doctor. She gave him the answer she had given since she was 16. She wanted to help people, believed medicine was the most direct and meaningful way to reduce suffering. It was true. He could hear that it was true. He could also hear that it was the prepared answer, the one that had been said often enough to become smooth. That's the reason you give when someone asks, he said, still looking at the annotation. That's different from the reason you became certain. The room went quiet in a specific way. I'm not sure what you mean, she said. Students who want to fix the world in the abstract end up in policy, research, public health. The ones who need to be physically present with a suffering person. There's usually something more personal in that. She met his eyes across the desk. Steady, composed. Maybe I just have a calling. Maybe, he said, and wrote something in the margin and moved on. He thought about her answer for 2 days afterward. He did not examine why. The fourth session moved faster than any of the previous ones. Something had shifted. She was finding her footing in the material, and the relief of it was visible in small ways. The quality of her attention, the way her pen moved with confidence rather than effort. She answered a complex question correctly, and he watched her work through it step by step, the logic clean and sequential. And she arrived at the answer with a precision that made him stop mid-annotation. Good, he said. One word, no elaboration. What happened next was something he had not prepared for and could not have. The smile that crossed her face was not the practiced one. He knew the practiced one by now, had mapped its speed and its particular quality, the way it arrived slightly ahead of any real feeling like a representative sent in advance of the thing itself. This was different. This came from somewhere below the surface and moved across her face before she could govern it. Undefended. Disproportionate. Real. And then they were both aware of it at the same moment, the awareness landing between them like a dropped object in a quiet room. She looked down at her notes first. He cleared his throat quietly and moved to the next question. After she left, he sat at his desk for a few minutes without moving. Then he picked up his pen and added to the notes he had been keeping on the blank sheet beside her file. The notes that were not part of any official documentation. He looked at what he had written, and then turned the page face down and went back to marking. It was around this time that Do Yun-yu began watching. They had been colleagues for 4 years, and friends, or something close to it, for longer than that, having overlapped during postdoctoral work at Yonsei before both ended up at Meridian through the particular chain of coincidences that deposited people in specific cities and departments. Do-yeon was sharp and careful and paid attention to patterns the way all good scientists did. And the pattern he had begun to observe in Taeyang was something he could not yet name but recognized instinctively as significant. It was not any one thing. It was the accumulation. The way Taeyang mentioned the tutoring assignment in passing once, with a flatness that was too deliberate. The way his office light was on later than usual on the evenings of the sessions. The way he had seen him once from the 3rd floor window, standing in the courtyard below in his good blazer in the October cold, looking at something Do-yeon could not see from that angle, with an expression he had never seen on Taeyang Beon's face before. He did not act on it yet. He filed it. The 5th session arrived, and Linda came in slightly late, which was the first time she had been anything other than early. She had her hair down, long, knotless braids loose around her face, and she was wearing the olive-green sweater she seemed to reach for when she was tired, which he had learned to identify as a reliable indicator. She sat and opened her notes and looked at him. "Sorry," she said. "I lost track of time." He didn't say that wasn't like her. He said, "Ready?" And they began. At the end of that session, while she was packing her bag, she said without looking up, "The thing you said last week, about the brain filing grief away when it doesn't have a safe space." I looked it up. A pause. "I found a lot of papers." He waited. "Is there a name for it? When you function completely normally from the outside, but something is misaligned on the inside." "There are several," he said carefully, "depending on what's driving it." She nodded slowly. She wasn't asking for herself, her tone said, except that she was, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. She zipped her bag and thanked him and left. And he stood by the window and watched the courtyard below, and thought about the particular courage it took to ask a question sideways, because you could not yet ask it straight. That night, Tumelo sat cross-legged on her bed, watching Linda stare out the window with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. "Can I say something?" Tumelo asked. "You're going to say it regardless." "When he said good last week." Tumelo paused deliberately. "The way you smiled, Linda. He is my professor. He is a person, Tumelo, with extraordinary bone structure," Tumelo said, because she was constitutionally unable to leave things alone. "And very long hair, I'm just saying." Linda threw a pillow. Tumelo caught it and laughed, and the moment dissolved into noise and the particular safety of a friendship, where you could say the true thing and call it a joke, and both parties would understand exactly what was meant. Later, in the dark, Linda lay awake and thought about nothing in particular. Or she tried to. The thing about nothing in particular is that it has a way of resolving itself into something very specific if you lie still long enough. She turned onto her side, closed her eyes. The 6th session was on a Wednesday afternoon, and she arrived on time with her notes prepared and her pen ready. And she sat across from him, and he began to teach, and she did not write a single word. Not because the material was unclear. Not because she was distracted in any ordinary sense. But because somewhere in the sequence of these 6 sessions, this room had become the one place in her life where she did not have to perform, and her body had decided, without consulting her, to simply stop, to be still, to breathe. She had been sitting in the warmth of that stillness for 40 minutes when he asked what page she was on. She looked down. The notebook was blank. He watched the performance come apart, the smile losing its scaffolding piece by piece until the face underneath was just hers, and hers was exhausted. Hers was a person who had been holding their breath for a very long time. Her voice was quiet. "I'm tired." "I know," he said. She looked at those 2 words. She picked them up and held them the way you hold something you didn't know you needed until someone handed it to you. He walked her to the door of the building that evening instead of only to his office doorway, a small deviation from routine, done, without comment. He said goodnight at the main entrance, and she said goodnight, and walked out into the cold evening toward Kessler Hall. He stood in the entrance for a moment watching her go, her braids over the collar of her coat, her stride measured and deliberate. Then he turned and went back upstairs. He nearly walked into Do-yeon in the 4th-floor corridor. Do-yeon was in his coat, clearly leaving. He had clearly also been watching from the corridor window. He did not pretend otherwise. "How long?" Do-yeon said quietly. Not a question exactly. More of an opening for something. "There's nothing to report," Taeyang said. "I'm not asking as the department. I'm asking as someone who has known you for 12 years and is standing here watching you walk a student to the building entrance." Do-yeon's voice was even. "I'm asking because I'm concerned." "Your concern is noted," Taeyang said, and went back to his office. Do-yeon stood in the corridor for a long time after he left. He turned his phone over in his hand. He was not a person who acted impulsively. That was important to understand about him. Everything he did next would be done carefully, and with what he believed was good reason, and would nevertheless cause damage that careful people cause when they are frightened and act on incomplete information. He took the elevator down and went home. He did not sleep well. Chapter 3. What she never told anyone. Session 7 was scheduled for a Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon, and by 2:20, Taeyang's office was empty in the way rooms become empty when the person they are waiting for is somewhere they should not be alone. He gave it 10 more minutes. Then he opened her file. He had looked at the emergency contact field before. This time he looked at something else. her enrollment records, her original application, the section where students listed their home address. The address was a neighborhood in Accra. It had not been updated since enrollment. He thought about the blank contact field, the lowercase n/a. The way she had said, "I found a lot of papers," with the careful neutrality of someone asking about themselves through a proxy. He went downstairs. He found her in Mercer Hall's lower corridor, where the old building connected to the newer Aldrich wing through a covered passageway that nobody used much in October because of the gaps in the walls where the wind came through. She was sitting on the floor against the stone wall with her knees pulled up and her phone face up in her lap. And she was not crying. She was past crying. She had the specific flatness of someone who had received news they already knew was coming and had been bracing against for weeks. He had passed Marco Esteves at the Harrington Library security desk on his way here. Marco had stopped him, told him he had seen Linda heading toward the passageway an hour ago, looking, in Marco's words, like someone had turned her lights off. That was the bridge. That was how he found her. He sat down on the floor beside her. He was in his good blazer. The stone floor was cold. She looked at him with an expression she didn't try to arrange. "You're going to ruin your jacket," she said. "I have others." Rain fell outside the passage gaps, the light gray and steady. Somewhere in the building above them, a class was letting out, and the muffled sound of it reached them as a low tide of voices and then receded. She turned her phone so he could see the screen. The email from the Meridian University Scholarship Review Board was formal and measured. The essential content was this: her GPA had declined below the required maintenance threshold for the second consecutive monitoring period. Her funding status was under immediate review. She had 30 days to demonstrate sufficient academic improvement, or her scholarship would not be renewed at semester close. He read it completely. Then he handed the phone back. "The second consecutive period," he said. "They flagged you last semester as well. I brought it back up." She set the phone face down. "I always bring it back up. It keeps slipping and I keep pulling it back and I don't know how much longer I can—" She stopped. He waited. "I don't have anyone to call," she said. Not as a bid for sympathy. As a fact. Clean and old. That field on the enrollment form. Emergency contact. I left it blank when I arrived, and I've left it blank every year since because there isn't anyone. My mother was—" She stopped again. Breathed through it. "She was my emergency contact." The word was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. He understood its weight precisely. "When?" he asked. "April, 14 months ago." She looked at the passageway wall across from them. "I came back 9 days after the funeral because the scholarship requires a minimum attendance record, and I was already at the edge of it. I came back and I sat through finals and I got a 3.9 and everyone told me how impressive I was, and I smiled and said thank you." She exhaled slowly. I haven't actually dealt with any of it. I don't know how. I don't know where it is anymore. I feel like I'm behind glass. Like I can see my life happening, but I can't reach it. Can't feel the edges of it. I just keep performing, and— She pressed her palm flat against her sternum. "And the performance has started to cost more than you have," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the rain through the gap in the wall and ordered what he wanted to say with the care it required. "There is a name for what you are describing," he said. "What you have experienced falls within what behavioral neuroscience calls complicated grief. Specifically grief that has been denied a processing space and redirected into function. The mind doesn't eliminate the grief, it archives it. And the archive puts pressure on everything else. Concentration, sleep, the capacity for ordinary feeling, the numbness, the disconnection, the sense of watching your life through glass. That is your nervous system running a program it designed to keep you operational when you had no space to fall apart. He paused. It is not weakness, Linda. It is adaptation. Your brain protected you the only way it knew how. But adaptive responses were never designed to be permanent states. Can cite the literature, Her voice thinned. I couldn't see it in myself. Most people trained in this field can't. That blind spot is well documented. When the mind is the thing that's coping, asking it to objectively assess its own coping is like asking a bruised hand to measure its own swelling. She laughed, short and real and slightly undone. The first genuine laugh he had heard from her in 6 sessions of careful observation. He filed the sound somewhere he didn't examine directly. They sat in the passageway while the rain continued outside, neither of them in any particular hurry. I want you to make an appointment with the university counselor, he said. Eunice Mwangi, Student Wellness Center, ground floor. Linda looked at her hands. I'm not trying to redirect you, he continued. What you are carrying requires grief work, and grief work is a specific discipline. What I can offer is neuroscience. What you need is someone trained in the language of loss. Those are different things, and one doesn't substitute for the other. You sound like you've said that before. I have. I said it to myself once. He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said most things that cost him something. It took me longer than it should have. She looked at him. This was the first thing he had ever said that was about himself, and it landed in the conversation like a door opening into a room she hadn't known existed. She didn't push it. She understood instinctively that it had been offered as a demonstration of trust, not an invitation to investigate. Will you go? He asked. If I say I'll think about it, I'll follow up on Thursday. She almost smiled. Okay, she said. I'll go. They stood. She was reaching for her bag when he turned toward her, and whatever he was going to say next, he didn't say because she looked up at the same moment, and the distance between them was abrupt and small, and neither of them moved for a beat that was several seconds too long. He was close enough that she could see the detail of his face, the small scar along his jaw she had noticed in the second session, the way his hair fell forward when he turned too quickly. He was close enough that she could tell he was deciding something, carefully, the way he decided everything. He stepped back. Come back the way you came in, he said. It's warmer. She nodded. They walked back through the building in the particular silence of 2 people who have just navigated something and have arrived, through effort, at the same correct decision. What neither of them knew yet was that the careful 12-year friendship between Taeyang Beon and Do-yeon Yu was about to produce consequences that no amount of correctness would fully protect them from. The following morning, Do-yeon arrived at work early. He had spent a week and a half weighing it. That was not nothing. He was not impulsive. But the image in his mind was specific. Taeyang in the 4th floor corridor watching her walk away, and the expression on his face that had lasted 3 full seconds after she disappeared around the corner. And before that, the way Do-yeon had once seen Taeyang's unofficial notes. By accident, glancing across the desk before Taeyang turned the page over. The handwriting too deliberate for administrative documentation, too detailed, about a specific student. He was not a cruel man. He told himself this as he opened his laptop. He was a careful one. And what careful men do, when they see someone they care about standing at the edge of a professional cliff, is reach for the guardrail before the fall, even if the person at the edge hasn't asked for it, and even if the reach itself causes damage. He typed the email to the department head with precision and care and the specific language of institutional concern. He pressed send. The reply arrived within the hour. A formal inquiry had been opened. Chapter 4. The Weight of Being Seen. Professor Baek Soo-hyun ran a meeting the way she ran everything. With precision, no wasted language, and the particular brand of institutional neutrality that had kept her department functioning cleanly for 11 years. She was not unsympathetic. She was procedural. There was a distinction, and she maintained it clearly. Taeyang sat across from her at 9 in the morning and answered every question with the same accuracy and efficiency he brought to everything. The tutoring was assigned. The sessions were documented. All contact had occurred in his office or open campus areas. All communication was on record and within academic channels. The concern filed, Baek said, cites a pattern of extended personal investment beyond the scope of the assigned tutoring. The student is dealing with significant personal circumstances that were affecting her academic performance, Taeyang said. Addressing those circumstances was relevant to the tutoring outcomes. Were you aware of those circumstances before they became relevant to the tutoring outcomes, or after? A brief pause. Honest. Both. Baek wrote something. The review will take 2 weeks. In the interim, all tutoring sessions with the student are suspended. She looked up. I want to be clear, Taeyang. Nothing in this file looks inappropriate, but I cannot clear a concern that's been formally lodged without a proper process. You understand that? I understand that, he said. He was back at his office by 9:40. He sat down. He looked at the wall. The thing that was immediately clear to him, sitting with the weight of it, was that he could manage the professional consequences. He had built an unblemished record across 15 years of academic work, and a 2-week review would confirm what was already true. What he could not manage as easily was the knowledge that someone he had trusted for over a decade had looked at something genuine and seen something suspect, and had acted on that perception with the full weight of institutional machinery before saying a single word to his face. He thought about that for a long time. He did not think about whether Do-hyun's concern had been entirely without basis. That was the honest part of it, and he knew it. And it sat with him with all the discomfort of a truth that complicated a clean narrative. Linda found out from Priya Subramaniam, who had overheard something at the faculty mailbox corridor and delivered it to the dorm hallway with the breathless velocity of someone who had not yet understood the specific gravity of what she was carrying. A concern, filed, about a professor and a student. No names, but the details were narrow. Tumelo heard it too. She turned from the conversation to look at Linda. Linda's face was very still. Linda, I need a minute, Linda said, and went into the room and closed the door. She stood in the middle of the floor with her coat still on. The thought that came was not about herself. It was about Taeyang, about the precision with which he had managed everything, the deliberate care, the way he had stepped back in the passageway, the way he had always stepped back, and the knowledge that the stepping back had not been enough, and that the gap between doing something correctly and being perceived as doing something correctly was wide enough that a formally lodged complaint could fall into it. She went to Mercer Hall. She didn't plan what to say. She knocked on his door and heard him say to come in, and then she opened it. He was standing at the window with his jacket off, his long hair loose, looking older and more tired than she had seen him look before. He turned. The expression he wore when he saw her was not the measured neutral she knew. It was something more unguarded than that. There for a half-second before he arranged it. Is this because of me? She asked. The room was still. It's being managed. That's not what I... Asked. He held her gaze. You didn't do anything wrong. I know I didn't. She took a step into the room. Neither did you. Something moved through his expression at that. Not relief, not gratitude, but something quieter than both. The acknowledgement, she thought, of someone who had been carrying a weight alone and had just been told, simply and without caveat, that the weight was real, and they had been right to carry it. Sit down, he said. Please. She sat. He didn't go to his desk. He took the chair across from her the way he always had in sessions. Close, level, without the authority of a desk between them. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment, gathering something. I want to say something clearly, he said. Everything that has happened in these sessions, everything I have done has been appropriate. I need you to be certain of that. I am certain of that, but... He looked up. I would be dishonest if I told you it has been only clinical. The way I have paid attention to you, that has not been only professional. He said it with precision, not as a confession of action, but as a statement of truth, making a careful distinction. Nothing I have done has crossed a line, but I have been aware, for some time, that a line exists. That is the honest account. Linda looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the water glass, slid across without comment. The passageway floor. The I know, 2 words that had held more weight than most full sentences she had heard in 14 months. Okay, she said quietly. The review will clear, he said. It will take 2 weeks, and then it will be done. And until then? Until then, the sessions are suspended. But you go to Eunice. You keep going. He held her eyes. That part does not change. She nodded. She stood. She picked up her bag, and then she put it back down and turned to face him from across the room with the expression of someone who has decided to say the true thing. I looked up complicated grief, she said. Properly, I mean. Not just the papers. I spent an evening reading about what happens to people who don't grieve. The physical toll, the cognitive toll, the way it reorganizes itself into other symptoms. I read about how the brain keeps generating distress signals, and the person keeps filing them away, and eventually the filing system breaks. She paused. I recognized every single thing on the list, every one. Her voice didn't shake. And I thought about the fact that you saw it, in 6 sessions without me saying a word. And I thought about what it meant that I hadn't told anyone for 14 months. And a professor in an assigned tutoring session is the first person to actually see it. She stopped, breathed. I'm saying thank you, she said. That's all? I'm saying thank you. He stood. He came around the desk slowly, not toward her, but to standing, a correcting of the distance between sitting and eye level, and looked at her from across the room. You were always going to find your way to it, he said. I just moved some furniture. She laughed, the same real laugh from the passageway, short and undone and genuine. He looked at her when she laughed and did not look away, and the room had that quality again. That specific, charged quality that had nothing to do with anything that had happened, and everything to do with something that had not. She picked up her bag. I'll go to Eunice. I know you will. She was at the door when she turned back one more time. For what it's worth, she said, you moved a lot of furniture. She left. He stood in the middle of his office for a while after the door closed, not doing anything in particular. And then he sat down and looked at the blank page beside her file, the page with the notes that were not official documentation, and turned it face up for the first time in 2 weeks. He read what he had written there across the weeks of sessions. He read it slowly. Then he folded the page in half and placed it in his desk drawer. Downstairs, in the covered passage between buildings, Do-yeon stood with his collar up against the cold, waiting. He had known Taeyang's schedule for 4 years. He had known he would come through here after his meeting. He had placed himself here deliberately, because some conversations needed to happen outside of offices. Taeyang came through and stopped when he saw him. The complaint was too far, Do-yeon said. No preamble. I know that. I knew it when I filed it, and I did it anyway, and He stopped. I was scared for you. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation. You could have come to me. Yes. We have known each other for 12 years. You could have walked down the hall. I know. Do-yeon looked at him with the expression of a man who has been carrying the weight of a decision that did not turn out as he intended. If I had asked you directly, would you have told me the truth? The question hung between them in the cold air. Yes, Taeyang said, and I would have told you that there was nothing to report. But you would also have told me that there was something to acknowledge. Taeyang held his gaze. He didn't answer. Which was, as Do-hyun had already known, the honest answer. Do-yeon nodded slowly. I'll write a retraction to Baek. I'll tell her the concern was based on incomplete observation, and that I withdraw it. Don't, Taeyang said. Let the process run. A withdrawn complaint 2 days after filing looks worse than a cleared one. That's very reasonable of you. I have a consistent record. It will clear. Do-yeon picked up his bag. He started to walk away, then stopped. Taeyang. He didn't turn around. What you feel, whatever it is, He exhaled. Be careful with it, for both your sakes. Taeyang said nothing. Do-yeon went. The investigation had 2 weeks to run, and in those 2 weeks the damage would not be dramatic or visible. It would be quiet, the particular quiet of a professional reputation held in suspense. The closed-door conversations that Taeyang knew were happening, because they always happened in these situations, regardless of their legitimacy. Students noticed when professors became suddenly unavailable. Ezra, his graduate teaching assistant, ran interference without being asked, rescheduling office hours, managing student queries, making himself large in the administrative spaces so that nothing spilled into the wrong context. Taeyang noticed. He said nothing, but he noticed. Linda went to see Eunice. She went reluctantly and arrived 4 minutes early and sat in the waiting area looking at the plants through the glass panel of the door until Eunice opened it. The room was full of living things. Shelf plants, window plants, a trailing vine over the door that had clearly been there for years. A small bowl of wrapped candies on the low table, the deliberate opposite of clinical. You don't have to be in crisis to be here, Eunice said, pouring tea. That's the first thing I want you to know. Okay. I'm also not going to ask how you are. Eunice sat. I've been told you're very good at answering that question. Linda looked at her. A colleague mentioned you might come. He didn't tell me anything else. A pause, warm and without edges. He didn't need to. Eunice asked her one question in that first session. Just one. When was the last time someone asked how you were and you told them the truth? Linda sat with it, gave the honest answer. And the session opened from there with the particular ease of a conversation between two people, where one of them has been carrying something for a very long time and has finally found a room big enough to set it down. She cried in that room for the first time since April of the previous year. Not the careful, controlled kind she had been barely managing. A real cry, full and unguarded, the kind of grief that had been waiting behind a locked door for 14 months, and finally heard the key. Eunice let it run. She didn't rush it, didn't soothe it prematurely. She sat with it like someone who understood that grief, properly witnessed, did not need to be managed, only held. When it was over, Linda felt scraped clean in the particular way of something that has been emptied of an old weight. Light in a way she had forgotten was possible. "Same time next week?" Eunice asked. "Yes," Linda said. She meant it without reservation. In the following 2 weeks, quietly and without announcement, something began to shift. She slept more, not well at first, but with the heaviness of a body given permission to stop running. She ate meals at actual mealtimes. She called her aunt in Accra on a Tuesday evening and talked for an hour about things she had not talked about with anyone. Her mother's last months, the funeral, the 9 days she had spent at home before flying back. The call left her hollowed out and strangely lighter, the way a wound feels after it has been properly cleaned. She went to Eunice every week. She did her coursework. She stopped clicking away the wellness survey emails. And she thought about Taeyang Beon in the way she had decided she was allowed to think about him. Clearly, without agenda, as a fact of her interior life that she neither dramatized nor suppressed. He had seen her. In 6 sessions of sitting across a desk, he had seen her more clearly than people who had known her for years. That was a real thing. Whatever else it was or wasn't, it was real. She was in the Harrington Library on a Thursday night when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was not from Taeyang. It was from the Meridian Scholarship Review Board. She stared at the notification for a moment before opening it, in the particular suspended second before you read something that has the power to change the shape of the next year of your life. Chapter 5. Let me carry this with you. The email was a request for a formal meeting, scheduled for Tuesday of the following week. The board wished to review her academic progress and personal circumstances before making a final determination on her scholarship status. Linda read it twice. Then she put her phone face down on the library table and looked at the Hudson River through the east-facing glass wall, dark and wide and carrying the lights of the opposite shore in long, trembling reflections. Marco appeared at her shoulder with a granola bar, which he set beside her laptop without comment. He glanced at her face. "Whatever it is," he said, "you'll handle it." She looked up at him. "How do you know?" He shrugged, the easy shrug of someone who had watched her outlast every other student in that building, night after night for 3 years. "Because you're always the last one still sitting," he said. "That counts for something." He went back to his desk. She looked at the granola bar for a moment. Then she unwrapped it and opened a new document and began to write. It wasn't her module notes this time, but something else. She didn't have a name for it yet. She only knew that Eunice had said, in their last session, that the people who healed most fully from complicated grief were those who eventually found a way to integrate the experience, to make it part of a larger story, rather than a wound running parallel to their life. She had been turning that over for days. And now, with the scholarship meeting on Tuesday, and 2 weeks of sleepless, careful work behind her, she opened a document and began writing the most honest piece of academic work she had ever attempted. She wrote about grief and its absence. She wrote about the brain's architecture of avoidance. She wrote about what the research said and what the research could not say. And she wrote, for 3 careful pages at the end, about what it felt like from the inside. The glass, the performance, the particular loneliness of a room full of people. She didn't name anyone. She didn't need to. The experience was legible on its own terms. She wrote until the library lights dimmed at midnight. "Time," Marco said from across the room, with a patience that had never once, in 3 years, become impatience. She saved the document. She went home. The investigation closed on a Thursday morning. All sessions had been appropriately assigned and documented. All communications fell within institutional channels. The concern was reviewed and found to have insufficient basis for formal action. The inquiry was closed with no finding against Professor Beon. Taeyang read the email at his desk with his coffee going cold beside him. He read it once, completely, and then set his phone face down and sat for a moment looking out at the courtyard below, where the oak trees stood bare and dark against the November sky, holding nothing. The relief was real. The other thing, the thing that had been sitting quietly alongside the professional concern for 2 weeks, separate from it, patient. That was real too. The 2 weeks had given him time to examine it honestly, which he had done with the same precision he applied to everything. He understood what it was. He also understood that naming it and acting on it responsibly were 2 entirely different timelines, and that one of them was not yet available. He picked up his phone and sent one message. Brief, professional, factual. The inquiry has been resolved. Sessions can resume at your convenience if you wish to continue. He set the phone down. He thought about the word wish, which had not been the word he originally typed. He had typed need. He had corrected it. The scholarship meeting was on a Tuesday morning in a small conference room in the administration building, and Linda arrived with a folder containing her academic improvement documentation, module progress records, assessment scores, lab completions, and a personal statement. Eunice had written a formal letter of support. The letter described, in the careful language of a clinical professional, the circumstances of the preceding 14 months. The loss, the deferred grief, the academic impact, and the active steps that had been taken. It did not ask for sympathy. It provided context. The board chair, Dr. Yewande Ibarra, read everything. She asked 4 questions. 2 were about academic records. 1 was about the support currently in place. 1 was about future plans. Linda answered each one directly, without deflection, without the practiced brightness, just clearly. She had been practicing clarity for several weeks now. It was harder than smiling and considerably more useful. Dr. Ibarra excused herself to confer. Linda sat in the hallway. Raphael passed and stopped and gave her a quick, warm smile. The uncomplicated kindness of someone who was not aware of the full picture but showed up consistently anyway. Whatever you're in, therefore, he said, you've got it. She thanked him genuinely. Dr. Ibarra came back 14 minutes later and told Linda that the board had voted to reinstate her scholarship with full retroactive effect, contingent on maintained academic progress and continued engagement with the wellness support program. She was also informed, quietly, that the board had decided to review its monitoring protocols, specifically the lack of an outreach mechanism for students whose performance declined without a prior record of concern. Linda's case had made the gap visible. She read the formal reinstatement letter in Eunice's office an hour later. She sat with it in both hands. She didn't smile immediately. She exhaled, long and slow and complete, the specific exhale of something released that has been held for a very long time. The kind of exhale that changes the quality of the air in the room. Eunice, from across the low table, said softly, "There she is." Linda looked up. Her face was open. "There she is," she agreed. She submitted her paper 3 days before the semester deadline. It had grown from those midnight library pages into a 40-page research piece. Rigorous, cited, deeply honest. The faculty marker who received it sent it to 2 colleagues before returning it with a grade. One of those colleagues was Taeyang. The marker attached a note. "You should read this." He read it in his office in the late afternoon, when the building was quiet and the November light had gone flat and silver. He read it once and turned back to the first page and read it again. He recognized everything in it, not because she had told him all of it, but because he had been paying the kind of attention that allows you to recognize the shape of a thing you've only seen in pieces. The paper was brilliant. It was also the most honest act of academic courage he had encountered in 15 years of this work. He set it down. He looked out at the courtyard. He thought about the note he had typed and corrected. The word wish instead of need. He was still thinking about it when he heard a knock on his door. She was standing in the doorway in her coat, her braids over her collar, her bag on one shoulder. The semester was officially over. She had no academic reason to be here. She stepped inside and he stood, and she set something on his desk. A small folded note, placed with deliberate care, and then stood back and looked at him. "The tutoring assignment is done," she said. "I know." "And the semester is done." She met his eyes. "And I'm not currently enrolled in any of your courses, and I haven't been your student in any formal sense since the last session was suspended." She said it clearly, not as a legal brief but as a statement of the changed landscape, placing the geography of their situation plainly on the table between them, so that what came next would not be ambiguous to either of them. He said nothing. He was listening with the focused entirety of his attention. "I spent 14 months convincing everyone around me that I was fine," she said, "including myself. You sat across a desk from me for 6 sessions and figured out that I wasn't. I don't know how to explain what that meant. I've tried, in the paper, not about you specifically, but about what it is to be seen when you've spent a very long time making yourself invisible. It changes something." She paused. "I'm not asking for anything that complicates your professional life," she said. "I know how much that life means to you. I'm only asking you not to disappear from mine, whatever form that takes, whatever pace that takes." She looked at him steadily. I want you to know that I see you too. Not just what you did for me, you. The person who sat on a cold floor and said I know and meant it." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the city moved, indifferent and continuous, doing the thing New York did regardless of what happened in any particular room in any particular building. Taeyang came around his desk slowly. He had been careful for so long and so deliberately, and with such complete awareness of what was appropriate and when. And now he moved with that same deliberateness but toward something rather than away from it. He stopped in front of her. The distance between them was nothing. He reached out his hand, not toward her face, not toward anything dramatic or cinematic. Just his hand, open, palm facing up, in the space between them. An offering. Unhurried, completely certain. Linda looked at it. She looked at his face. The composed and precise face she had misread in the beginning as cold, and had learned over weeks to read correctly as careful. A man who moved slowly because he understood the weight of things. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with the specific, deliberate gentleness of someone who understands the value of what they are holding. "I told you," he said, low and certain, the voice he used when a conclusion was final. "Let me carry this with you." She nodded. The smile that moved across her face then was the truest expression she had worn in over a year. Not performed, not managed, not sent ahead of the feeling to make it presentable. Just real. Just hers. They stood in the stillness for a long time. Neither of them moved to leave. Outside, the December light fell flat and silver over the Meridian campus. In the Harrington Library, Marco Estevez settled in at the security desk and looked at the empty chair where Linda usually sat at this hour, and then at his phone, which had not buzzed with her usual late-night, "I'm on my way out" text. He smiled at nothing in particular and ate his own granola bar. In Kessler Hall, Tumalo was sitting at her desk, failing to read her textbook when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, read the message from Linda once, stared at it, read it again. It was not a long message. It was, in fact, 4 words. She pressed the phone to her sternum and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this specific information for longer than she would ever, under any circumstances, admit to. In the Student Wellness Center, Eunice Mwangi locked up her office for the evening. She stood for a moment in the doorway of the plant-filled room with her coat over her arm, thinking about a young woman who had walked in 3 weeks ago, holding herself together, with the specific tension of someone for whom holding together had become indistinguishable from living. Grief did not resolve, Eunice believed. It integrated. It became part of the structure of a person, rather than the thing blocking the doorway. And the moment that happened, the moment a person stopped fighting the grief and let it take its proper place, alongside everything else, that was when they got to start being fully themselves again. She turned off the light. In a 4th-floor office in Mercer Hall, 2 people stood in the stillness of an ending that was also the quietest possible kind of beginning. The window showed the courtyard below, the bare oak trees, the lamplight on the wet stone. The city made its sounds. The room was warm. There was no kiss. There was no grand declaration. There was only this. 2 people, fully present, choosing each other honestly. Not in spite of everything that had passed between them, but because of how clearly they had seen each other inside it. For both of them, it was more than enough. 1 in 5 university students experiences a significant mental health challenge during their studies. Most never seek help, not because help isn't available, but because the performance of being fine becomes its own kind of habit. Complicated grief, emotional masking, and high-functioning anxiety are real, recognized, and treatable. If you are carrying something too heavy to carry alone, you are not your performance. You do not have to be okay to deserve support. Reaching out is not weakness. It is the beginning of something more honest. The end. This story was made for everyone who has ever said, "I'm fine," and meant something completely different. If it moved you, share it. Someone out there needs it today. Subscribe to Vees AfroSeoul Love for new stories every Sunday and sometimes Wednesday. Drop a like and tell me your favorite part from the story. I really want to know. The community is growing, and there is always a seat for you here.